Finding unity among races in a world divided is difficult enough. Finding unity among religions, maybe even more so. My guest is Dr. Rabbi Ari Lamm, the chief executive of B'nai Zion and founder of the JOSHJA Project. Thanks so much, Rabbi, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell me a bit about the digital platform, the JOSHJA Project?
Joshua sort of universe, as we think about it, is a project that we're very excited to be working on, which is a platform for bringing great ideas of faith and tradition and religion in a fun, accessible way out into the mainstream culture, whether through podcasts, through feature films, through video games, and on and on and on. So essentially, the way we see it is that for some reason and in some way, in the last 100 years, the great institutions of faith and tradition have sort of been positioned as like the 100-year-old grandpa wagging its finger in an admonitory way at everybody else and telling everybody, don't do this, don't do that. When in reality, what for thousands of years religion has been, and particularly biblical religion, in my case, Judaism and Christianity as well, we have always been those crazy people in the desert, dreaming incredible dreams, serving as a countercultural force. We've always been the counterculture. We've always been, to borrow a phrase from my childhood, we've always been the cool kids table, and it's time for us to get back there. And so that's what we're building.
Multi-faith dialogue focuses on our differences, not our similarities, but the JOSHJA Project is doing just that, bringing different faiths to get together.
We have all these amazing 1,000, 2,000, 3,000-year-old traditions of wisdom and beauty and transcendence that all have unique and very different ways of approaching the good and bringing virtue and flourishing into human affairs. And what we're trying to do is harness that power. The folks who already are well set in society, trying to undo all of the ties that bind us, and essentially arguing that things like community, the miraculous, revelation, these kinds of things are holding us back rather than pushing us forward. And what we found is that, in fact, this kind of attitude has led to two very terrible things. First of all, loneliness. Once we get rid of the ties that bind us, then community is something that very easily disappears. And we've seen this in America and Canada and the United Kingdom. The loneliness epidemic, as health experts are calling this, is only going to get worse, and communities are only going to dissolve more. The other, paradoxically almost, is risk aversion, right? Because if all we have is reason and logic and so on and so forth, no sense of the transcendent, of the miraculous, then it makes sense to sort of take it slow. Don't take any wild and crazy chances. It really, for thousands of years, we tend to think of the wild imagineering of today's society as emanating primarily from Palo Alto or Singapore, from Silicon Valley, widely conceived. But for thousands of years, incredible imaginative ideas emanated from traditional faith, from religion. Because we were the ones dreaming wild and crazy ideas. We were the ones who said that, yes, there's some higher purpose to this world, that life actually is weird and you should embrace that weirdness. And so, the way we see it is that the future of faith cooperation is not in trying to position ourselves as more or less the same, but rather bringing our unique strengths, what the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, who just passed away, called the dignity of our differences, marshaling those things together and showing the wider society that the power of tradition and faith as a galvanizing force for social good, both by bringing people together and igniting our imagination so that we can envision a future of goodness and transformative power, whether it's through technology, through social experimentation in a positive way. Like what can we do to bring together communities in novel ways that we haven't done before? This is what we're trying to harness, the power of religion and faith to imagine a better, brighter, more just and more compassionate world.
In a society where some people don't even know what the Bible is, or they don't read it, or how are we to bring this amazing passion? Is the only way through joining religious faiths together?
Such an amazing question. I think what we've seen, anytime we see explosions of violence across the modern world, again, not to overgeneralize, but often what we see are explosions of violence from people who feel just disaffected, disconnected, whether in an immediate sense, people without fathers or mothers or parents, people whose communities have let them down, people who are just feel disaffected, feel displaced. The violence is horrific and heinous, and we believe in a God who punishes people. But at the same time, we as citizens of this world need to ask ourselves, as God's creations, what can we do to create a society where violence is not sought as an answer by people who feel disaffected, and in fact, where people don't feel disaffected. And it seems to me that the best thing that we can do is provide people with a sense of belonging, a sense of meaning, and a sense of community. Strong community is the best way to keep people focused on a goal, focused on something bigger and more beautiful and more wonderful.
What do we do for the people who are suffering and so disenfranchised? What systems are in place for them?
So I think what we're seeing is that sort of people are increasingly disaffected from old ways of doing community. I mean, it could be for better or worse, but that's the reality. And at the same time, people are feeling more than ever before that they want something more. And so what that says to me is that this is the time for us to really lean into all of the incredible tools and blessings of the contemporary digital age to reach people we would never otherwise reach. How do you regard a world and era defining technology like the internet? Something that can bring untold terribleness into our lives and can expose us to all the horrors of, that are in every dark nook and cranny of the human experience. But at the same time, it's the kind of technology that makes possible the words that prophets uttered in the heartland of the territory of Judah thousands of years ago. I mean, 27,000 years ago, a prophet, or 26,000 years ago, a prophet said that, a word will be spoken in the desert and it will be heard in all four corners of the earth. And that until quite recently, until a blink of an eye in the span of human consciousness, until 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you would have imagined that this was some sort of fantastical, magical, supernatural vision, but really it's something that's now in our grasp. And so we have to ask ourselves, how can we build the kind of warm, enveloping, engrossing, purposive community for people across the globe in ways that doesn't necessarily require a person to walk down the street to the local, community center or the local church? I mean, we should think about how to strengthen those things as well. But how do we reach people in ways we couldn't have reached them before, through podcasts, through faith apps?
And that's what you're doing through the JOSHJA project.
Precisely, through the JOSHJA network and through all the things that we're doing. How do we reach people? And I think the opportunities for doing this are unparalleled in the history of revealed religion since Sinai.
Yes. But then we're up against HN, QAnon, like we're up against all Facebook, like you said, and Rabbi Sachs. It's beautiful, but then on the other hand, it's really destructive too.
When you think about what Gnosticism is about, again, without oversimplifying, these are folks who in very different ways and in very complex ways are looking for secret knowledge, for knowledge beyond this world, knowledge that they felt was being hidden from them by the mundane and by the surface reading of texts. And that is essential. That heresy is essentially what you're seeing today with 4chan, 8chan, and QAnon. This is precisely what we are confronting. People who
Rabbi, I have shivers because that's exactly it. I never even thought of it. But Rabbi, didn't Jesus say there are things I can tell you that you can't handle right now?
Yes. And so I think in all of our traditions, whether in Christianity or in Judaism, for example, in the Jewish tradition, there's a popular understanding of it, but we have the Kabbalah, which is the tradition of mysticism, not the pop and, weird version that you find in Hollywood, but there's a very long standing thousand-year-old serious tradition of mysticism that, in rabbinic tradition, you're not supposed to study until you reach a certain age and a certain stage, and there's certain things you're not supposed to investigate. And I think what that says to us is that when we are told, that there are things beyond our ken, does that mean that we absolutely must are forbidden to ask questions about it, or on the other hand, that we must seek it all out and we must satisfy our deepest, darkest curiosity. I think both of those are wrong.
Yeah.
And I think actually both of those speak to the two grand heresies of the day. 4chan, 8chan, QAnon, that's the heresy of Gnosticism. On the other side, we have the heresy of Manichaeism, which is the other great heresy that the Orthodox Church fought, which is the idea that the world can be divided into only good and evil. There's a God of darkness and a God of light. And, when you look at the kind of polarization that we're facing, the inability to deal with difference in a healthy way, that's the heresy of Manichaeism. So on the one hand, you have the Gnostics who are insisting on investigating all wisdom and every secret must be uncovered, which is a way towards madness. And on the other side, you have the Manichaeans who are saying this is the only way you can think and everything else is terrible and evil and dark. That's also heresy. And so I think what we folks from sort of the mainstreams of our great traditions in the contemporary age need to do is push forward on the path of righteousness and say, it's true. The world as we see it is not the world as it truly is. There are some mysteries that will always elude us, but that's okay. We can cope with not understanding everything. And in fact, being humble in that tradition, having that sense of humility that perhaps we don't understand everything. That's a defining element of the stories of Moses. I'm sure in very different ways, but that's also a defining element of the story of Jesus as it's told in the Gospels. And I think, a healthy politics that will be inspired by faith and tradition and religion moving forward will have sort of two foundation stones to it. One will be humility, understanding that there are things we don't know, we don't understand, and the positions that we hold with conviction and we believe them and we hold them with principle, but we also understand that we don't have the entire truth. And at the same time, the other pillar will be that sense of wild imagination. Instead of focusing on what divides us and how terrible everybody else is around us, instead of focusing on all the ways that everybody else is wrong, let's imagine, let's dream about ways that we can bring rightness and goodness into the world. What creative new things can we do? That's our task in the coming generation.
I want to know what your point of view is on white supremacy and the fact that we've got to face it.
God's unique and sole sovereignty over the earth not only implies, but directly leads to the natural conclusion that all human beings are created by God, created in the image of God. We all descend from the same person. In fact, the rabbis have this wonderful tradition that the reason that humanity was created from originally as one person was so that none of us could ever claim that our ancestors are greater than anyone else's ancestors.
Right, exactly.
And so, if you deny that all of us are of equal dignity, of equal worth in the eyes of God, if you assert that one race, as it were, is beneath, is somehow hierarchically beneath another race that is in some way inferior, if one person is inferior naturally to another person, you are denying the sovereignty of God over this world, and that is nothing less than the crime of idolatry. Mm-hmm. And that leads me to, I think, the most important point when it comes to white supremacy and racism from a faith tradition, which is not how do we diagnose it? That's obviously the first question, but how do we fight it? And it seems to me that, at least in an American context, there has never been progress made in the fight against racism and white supremacy that has not been rooted directly in the vocabulary, ideas, and values of the Bible. Never. From the founding era to Harriet Tubman, to Frederick Douglass, to Martin Luther King Jr., and go all the way down the line to Barack Obama talking about the JOSHJA generation. It has never happened before. The reason being, because it is precisely those values, and especially the doctrine of humanity being created in the divine image, so that even though none of us are in each other's images, we are all in the image of God. It is that doctrine that has guided our society, haltingly, frustratingly, slowly to be sure, but inexorably, I think, and Martin Luther King Jr. certainly believed, towards a place where we can actually recognize the dignity and worth that each of us possess in equal measure. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if we're going to fight the good fight, the urgent fight against racism and white supremacy in our societies, then we need to make sure that we're using our best and most effective and most affecting tool, and that is the wisdom, vocabulary, and lessons and values of the Bible.